This conference invites us to explore new frameworks in agriculture, trade, and technology, not as abstract ideas, but as lived realities shaped by innovation, resilience, and deep local knowledge. Throughout today's session, we will explore critical questions. How can Africa move up the value chain in both agriculture and minerals? What does meaningful African-led innovation look like? And how do we move from ideas to implementation in ways that are equitable, sustainable, and impactful?
As you know, we have many resources in Africa. We have the resources in agriculture, but also in the mining sector. In the agriculture, we have sometimes good production, but the transformation is not done in the continent, and the raw materials are exported. So we need to find some strategy and put more effort into the transformation so that we can have added value for the agricultural commodities.
Africa has a lot to offer in the global agenda, and Africa does not lack resources. What we lack is value addition. Africa should be able and try as much as possible to put the necessary frameworks in place to be able to add value to whatever we produce. We need to go beyond exporting raw materials.
How can the African diaspora help the continent to empower its human capital? And throughout our discussions, it was concluded that one way to empower the African human capital should be through talent mobility.
So let us begin this journey of learning, reflection, and meaningful exchange. Let us begin our first session, Green Industries or Lost Opportunities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Prince Da Costa Aboagi.
Climate change is addressed in two ways, either through mitigation or adaptation, right? And in Africa and other developing regions, it's basically finance and also capacity building support and all that. So this is what we are doing. Either you go unconditional and then we go conditional. Research has shown that the conditional is mostly within the region of the developing areas, right? So the developing areas or the developing regions like Africa are mostly doing the unconditional ones, because at least we know Africa always needs support, basically. So we are mostly doing the unconditional ones. We need to add value to our raw materials. Majority of the world's population will be living in Africa, most of them being young people. It also shows that we have the human resource. We should develop the human resource to a better human capital that can add value to Africa, to our resources. The last aspect I would want to talk about is that Africa should be more proactive instead of being reactive. There are a lot of things going on across the globe. We don't need to wait for it to happen before we take a decision or before we react towards them. We should be more proactive in terms of climate change, climate adaptation. We should be more proactive in terms of international trade, and we should be more proactive in terms of security, food security, and all that. If the conditional NDCs are followed as it's supposed to be followed, and then we have this deep decarbonization. So for instance, all these net zero target, we say that okay, by 2030 we are targeting that we'll reduce our carbon emissions by, let's say, 50%, let's say 80% by 2050 and all that. The conditional NDCs, which looks at what I want to do plus the support that I will receive externally, and then plus my target. If we are able to do that efficiently, then we are likely to reach the gap. So that is the 1.5 degrees Celsius, because the Paris Agreement says that by 2030 at least we should limit global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. If you are not able to do anything, at least it should be below 2.0, right? So this is the global agenda that all of us are trying to move towards, to limit global warming. And then in the side of the African industries, they may want to reduce their prices so that they will remain competitive, right? And as we reduce our prices to remain competitive, realize that revenue will decrease, and then our profit margins will also decrease, and we know what will also bring to employment issues, government revenue, GDP, and all that. So what I'm saying here is that these kind of global policies are something that, as African students, right? But whenever we have the opportunity to discuss some of these trade policies, we should look at the risk that it imposes to Africa and African industries. The CBAP, as I've presented today, has two ways: either helping African countries to go green, or African countries might lose our global competitiveness. So we presented this framework today, or I presented this framework today on behalf of my team members in Sweden, to facilitate discussions on how Africa and its industries can be well positioned and be ready for these emerging carbon border adjustment policies. And I know that going forward there will be studies that look at the quantitative analysis of the degree to which African countries are prepared or are ready for these policies. Thank you very much.
I'd like to now call on the next speaker, Dr. Papa Salusa, who will be talking about resources, land and leverage, Africa's dual challenge in minerals and agriculture.
And when I was being contacted in Madagascar, somebody called me. So to call somebody, you need a phone, right? And one important element we have, which is like unavoidable nowadays, is what we call battery. But where do we get battery? We need some minerals. Where are those minerals? Probably in Africa. That's why I put these two pictures, like cacao and also kind of mining. And these are like interconnected, mining and agriculture. At the same time, you have like the mining sector, where we have a lot of minerals, phosphate rock, basalt and so on. And those minerals should also be interconnected with agriculture so that we can improve the efficiency. Africa is supplying the world with materials, but then the value is captured is very, very low. So the question now is, how much of the global chocolate do you think it comes from Africa? So we have here some options: 50, 30, 10, or less than 10%. So less than 10% is like the value added. So that means you are like producing 70%, but what you capture is less than 10%. That is one problem. So I took the example of cacao, because this is like one very famous known commodity in Africa, but this almost the same if you go to the other speculation. If you don't really try to change the game, the system, maybe this will continue forever. So we need to really put some energy to see whether we can, from 70%, if you can at least have like 20, 50% that is processed in the continent. That is very, very important. And somehow the African government should at least try to work more closely with the farmers, with the extension services, and put more effort and give them more support so that they can have not only subsistence productivity, but also maybe agriculture oriented to how can I say, commercialization, so they can have like profit and nutrition. Another question come in. So for the global energy transition, it depends on this mineral like cobalt or lithium or copper. So I want to ask, what was the world cobalt supply coming from Africa? Like if you look at like the world cobalt, and then they extract it from Africa, about how much do you think is coming from the continent? So almost 70% of the cobalt is coming from Africa and mainly from DR Congo. Most African sells outside the continent. And I think it's the same for us. Maybe if I ask some of you whether you have visited some African countries, very few or few will tell me, I've been in Senegal or I've been in Morocco, but we prefer take our money and go visit US. I was in Hawaii, I was in Canada, so we're very happy to say that. But in fact, we don't really, I feel we don't really matter a lot about the African continent. Not only the commodities, but the human being also. So inside the continent, only 17% is exchanged between countries. And most of the time, we are like sending the material outside. And that is maybe the problem Prince was talking about. If there is any disruption in the China, then this will be affecting the African continent. But if we think more of like trading among us, I think that also will be a positive aspect. So that the Africa's challenge is not the lack of resources. We all know about that. And the challenge now is how really do we put effort to capture what we produce. So most of the time, we don't do the transformation. So we should move from extraction to transformation, and then from the raw producer to the industrial participant. So thank you very much for your attention.
So I'd like to introduce our last speaker, Dr. Augusto Vundo, who will speak about building the architects, education, innovation, and technology for Africa's next chapter.
How can we explore this human capital? How can we make sure that the human capital we have can serve not only Africa, but also the world? Are our educational system aligned with the digital economy? So if we are trying to reglobalize, and now we are mostly dealing with digital systems, we are dealing with technology, we are dealing with AI. How are our educational systems adjust to this new reality? So basically, what I'm trying to say is that we would have to move from an industry-related economy into a digital economy. Now, are we ready? Maybe yes, or maybe not. And today is the future. So we are the ones who are supposed to run Africa, to run our countries. But we hardly think of it. You look at a child, you don't think that, okay, this person in 5-10 years' time will be the one in charge of this country. Therefore, if I want a good institution, then I need to make sure this child has the right education. So what do? We ignore. Then when they become adults, it's, oh, we have very poor human resources. People go to university, they can't even read. They can't even use a computer. They can't do this and that. Why? But the same people went through us. First at home, then through our educational system. And we all know that in Africa, education is not about going to school only. It's normally a community. I was raised by a community. So I'm the result of my community. So it's a shared responsibility. If we look at the data from Africa, the rate of girls going to school compared to boys, the rate of girls is very low. So if you have a very small percentage of girls going to school, then of course you will have a very small percentage of women in power. or involved in the system. So that's why it's important for us to reinforce the idea of civil society as a global part of the ecosystem itself. Despite of all these setbacks on gender and other aspects, we do have some countries that can stand as examples when it comes to innovation in Africa. So we are talking about Nigeria, we are talking about Kenya, South Africa, Egypt. And there's also a growth in fintech, logistics, and AI. And this data is from the Development Bank Innovation Reports. Therefore, if we invest in Africa, then we have this potential. Africa could also become a global innovation hub. And finally, Africa could become a driver of sustainable growth. So it's all up to us. It's all up to us. Even though we are in the African diaspora, I think we should participate back in our countries, in our continent in general, through technology transfer and global mobility. You don't really have to go back to Africa and stay there forever, but you can go and share your idea. You can adapt your idea. You are not forbidden from going to Africa and going back to wherever you are. We are always potential. We need to skip the potential and become the fact. Okay, thank you everyone. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr.